The dust swirled around Elena's boots as she crouched behind the crumbling concrete wall. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking her rifle for the third time in 10 minutes. The weight of the weapon felt familiar in her grip, like an extension of her own body after years of training and countless missions. But today felt different. Today, the enemy had them surrounded. She pressed her back against the wall and listened to the chaos erupting around her position. Gunfire echoed through the abandoned factory complex, mixing with shouted orders in multiple languages. Her team of 8 soldiers had been tracking a high-value target through this industrial wasteland for 2 days. What should have been a simple extraction mission had turned into a nightmare when enemy reinforcements arrived from 3 different directions. Elena wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the metal rooftops and concrete structures, creating waves of heat that made the air shimmer like water. Through her scope, she could see enemy positions scattered across the factory grounds. They had the high ground, better numbers, and seemed to know exactly where her team was hiding. Her radio crackled to life. "Phoenix, this is Command. What's your status?" The voice belonged to Captain Rodriguez, her commanding officer who was coordinating from the base 20 miles away. Elena keyed her radio carefully, keeping her voice low. "Command, we're pinned down in Sector 7. Enemy has us surrounded with approximately 40 hostiles. We have visual on the target building but can't advance without taking heavy casualties." A pause filled the airwaves before Rodriguez responded. "Phoenix, you need to hold position until nightfall. Air support is 12 hours out due to weather conditions in the region. Can you maintain?" Elena looked around at her team's positions. She could see Martinez behind an overturned truck, his ammunition running low based on his measured fire pattern. Thompson was treating a wounded soldier behind a concrete barrier, blood visible on his hands even from this distance. The others were spread across defensive positions, but she could tell from their body language that morale was dropping fast. "Copy that, Command. We'll hold position," she replied, though privately she wondered if they could last that long. The enemy had been probing their defenses for the past hour, testing for weak points. Elena had counted at least 6 different approach routes they could use to overrun her team's position. The abandoned factory provided some cover, but it also created blind spots where enemies could advance unseen. She needed to find a way to even the odds. Elena studied the layout through her scope once more. The main enemy command post was positioned on a water tower approximately 800 meters away. She could see figures moving around radio equipment, and what appeared to be a senior officer directing operations. If she could eliminate their command structure, it might create enough confusion for her team to either advance or retreat to a better position. The problem was getting a clear shot. Between her position and the water tower lay open ground, enemy patrols and several buildings that blocked direct line of sight. She would need to move to a different location, which meant exposing herself to enemy fire and leaving her team's defensive perimeter. She keyed her radio again, this time switching to the team frequency. "Team, this is Phoenix. I'm going to attempt a flanking maneuver to disrupt enemy command. Martinez, you have tactical leadership until I return." Martinez's voice came back immediately. "Negative, Phoenix. Too risky with this many hostiles in the area." Elena had already made up her mind. She began moving along the wall, staying low and using the concrete barriers for cover. Her rifle was slung across her back, and she carried her sidearm ready for close encounters. Every step required careful calculation as she mapped out enemy positions and timing their patrol patterns. The first obstacle was a 50-meter stretch of open ground between her current position and an abandoned office building. She waited for the right moment when enemy attention was focused elsewhere, then sprinted across the space in a crouched run. Bullets immediately started impacting around her position as enemies spotted the movement, but she dove behind cover just as the concrete wall erupted in sparks where her head had been moments before. Inside the office building, Elena found herself in a maze of cubicles and overturned furniture. Sunlight streamed through broken windows, creating patches of bright light and deep shadows. She moved carefully through the debris, testing each step to avoid making noise that might give away her position to enemies who might be searching the building. She climbed to the second floor using a partially collapsed staircase, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. From the windows on this level, she had a better view of the water tower, but there were still too many obstacles blocking a clean shot. She needed to get higher and find a position with clear line of sight. The building's roof access was blocked by fallen debris, but Elena found a window that opened onto a fire escape. The metal structure groaned under her weight as she climbed, each step creating small sounds that seemed amplified in the afternoon air. She paused frequently to listen for signs that enemies had detected her movement. From the roof, Elena finally had the vantage point she needed. The water tower was clearly visible, and she could see the enemy command post in detail through her scope. 3 officers were gathered around communication equipment, with one man who appeared to be the senior commander based on how the others deferred to him. Guards were positioned around the base of the tower, but their attention was focused outward toward her team's position. Elena settled into a prone shooting position and began calculating the shot. 800 meters in this heat and wind would require precise adjustments to her scope. She had one opportunity to make this count before enemy forces would locate her position and either eliminate her or force her to relocate again. As she fine-tuned her scope settings, Elena realized that the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The afternoon light was starting to change, creating longer shadows and different wind patterns. She would need to time this perfectly, accounting for all environmental factors while her team continued to hold their increasingly precarious position below. Elena pressed her eye to the scope and began her breathing exercises. 4 seconds in, hold for 2, 4 seconds out. The rhythm helped steady her heartbeat and calm her mind despite the chaos erupting around the factory complex below. Through the magnified view, she could see individual details of the enemy command post with crystal clarity. The senior commander was a tall man with graying hair, probably in his 50s, wearing desert camouflage with colonel's insignia. He stood beside a communications table, pointing at maps and giving orders to subordinates who scurried to relay his commands through radio equipment. 2 other officers flanked him, and Elena counted 6 guards positioned around the water tower's base. She calculated wind speed by observing how the dust moved across the open areas between buildings. The afternoon heat was creating thermal updrafts that would affect bullet trajectory over such a long distance. Elena made mental notes of all variables while keeping the crosshairs centered on her target. A burst of automatic gunfire from below reminded her that time was running short. Her team was burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate, and the enemy was becoming more aggressive in their probing attacks. She needed to take this shot soon, or risk losing the opportunity entirely. Elena adjusted her scope for the distance and environmental conditions, then settled into her final shooting position. The concrete roof was hot against her body, but she forced herself to ignore the discomfort. Her finger found the trigger and began applying the initial pressure that would prepare the rifle for firing. Just as she was about to take the shot, movement in her peripheral vision made her pause. A group of enemy soldiers was climbing onto a nearby rooftop, apparently trying to gain a better firing angle on her team's position. If they succeeded, they would have a clear shot at Martinez and the others who were still holding the defensive line below. Elena found herself facing an impossible choice. She could take the command shot and potentially disrupt enemy coordination, but that would mean abandoning her team to immediate danger from the soldiers moving into position. Or she could engage the closer threat first, but that would likely alert the entire enemy force to her position and eliminate any chance of the long-range shot. She watched through her scope as the enemy soldiers set up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun on the rooftop. Once that weapon was operational, her team's position would become untenable. They would be caught in crossfire with no chance of survival until nightfall. Elena made her decision. She swung her rifle toward the nearer threat and quickly acquired targets. The range was much shorter, only about 300 meters, but she would need to engage multiple hostiles in rapid succession before they could return fire or alert the command post to her position. Her first shot took down the soldier manning the machine gun, the bullet impact spinning him away from the weapon. The second shot eliminated the spotter before he could fully comprehend what was happening. The remaining 3 soldiers on the roof scrambled for cover, but Elena had already shifted her aim to the communications equipment they had brought with them. 2 more precise shots destroyed their radio gear, cutting their link to the command structure. The surviving soldiers began firing wildly in her direction, but their shots were falling short and wide. Elena waited for them to expose themselves while reloading, then methodically eliminated each threat with careful, aimed fire. The engagement lasted less than 60 seconds. But Elena knew it had compromised her position. Enemy forces throughout the complex would now be searching for the sniper, who had just eliminated an entire squad. She had perhaps minutes before they would locate her rooftop and coordinate a response. Elena immediately began moving to a new position, while keeping the water tower in sight. The building's roof had several ventilation units and air conditioning systems that provided some concealment. But she needed better cover if she was going to survive long enough for another shot at the command post. As she low-crawled between cover points, Elena could hear increased radio chatter from enemy positions. They were coordinating search patterns and repositioning forces to hunt for her location. She watched through her scope as soldiers began moving between buildings in organized sweep formations. The enemy commander on the water tower had noticed the disruption and was pointing in different directions while barking orders into his radio. More guards were climbing up to reinforce the command post, making Elena's target even more difficult to reach. She estimated she now had perhaps 15 guards around the water tower base, with several positioned specifically to watch for sniper threats. Elena reached the far edge of the rooftop and discovered she could access an adjacent building through a gap between structures. The jump was risky, about 6 feet across with a 2-story drop if she missed, but it would put her in a better position, while moving her away from the area where enemies were concentrating their search. She slung her rifle securely across her back and prepared for the leap. Below, she could hear boots on stairs as enemy soldiers entered the building she was leaving. They would reach the roof within minutes and discover her previous firing position. Elena took a running start and launched herself across the gap. For a moment she was airborne, suspended above the concrete and debris 2 stories below. Her hands caught the edge of the adjacent building's roof, and she pulled herself up just as shouts erupted from the building behind her. The enemy had found her previous position. On the new rooftop, Elena discovered an old water tank that provided excellent concealment while maintaining line of sight to the enemy command post. She settled into position behind the tank and once again began calculating the shot. The angle was slightly different now, requiring new adjustments to account for the changed trajectory. Through her scope, she could see the enemy commander was becoming increasingly agitated. He was receiving reports from the search teams and coordinating their efforts to locate her. Elena realized that eliminating him now would not only disrupt their immediate tactical operations but also potentially save her team from the systematic hunt that was developing. She steadied her breathing and began the final calculations for the 800-meter shot. The sun was continuing its descent toward the horizon, and she noticed that the light was becoming more directional. In a few hours, sunset would create optimal lighting conditions for long-range shooting, but she wasn't sure her team could hold out that long. Elena made minor adjustments to her scope and settled into her shooting position. The crosshairs found the enemy commander, who was standing in profile while examining a map. It was a perfect target presentation, but she would need to account for wind drift and the slight upward angle of the shot. As she prepared to fire, explosions erupted near her team's position. The enemy was bringing in heavier weapons, probably mortars or rocket-propelled grenades. Elena could see Martinez and the others scrambling to new cover as their defensive positions came under increasingly accurate fire. The mortar rounds were walking closer to her team's position with each salvo. Elena watched through her scope as Martinez dragged a wounded soldier behind better cover, while Thompson returned fire with measured bursts from his assault rifle. The enemy was systematically destroying their defensive positions, and she could see that several of her teammates were running low on ammunition based on their increasingly conservative fire patterns. Elena forced herself to focus on the immediate problem. The enemy commander was still visible through her scope, but now he was moving more frequently as he coordinated the escalating attack. She would need to time her shot carefully to catch him during one of his stationary moments. A new sound reached her ears, the distinctive whine of incoming artillery. Elena recognized it immediately and felt her stomach drop. The enemy wasn't just using mortars anymore. They had called in proper artillery support. Her team's position would be obliterated within minutes if she couldn't disrupt the fire mission. Through her scope, she watched the enemy commander speaking into a radio handset while pointing toward her team's location. He was likely coordinating the artillery strike, providing targeting information to gun crews positioned somewhere beyond her line of sight. Elena realized this wasn't just about eliminating a tactical threat anymore. It was about saving the lives of 7 soldiers who were depending on her. She steadied her breathing and placed the crosshairs on the commander's center mass. 800 meters in these conditions required perfect execution. Elena began applying pressure to the trigger, feeling the familiar resistance that preceded the firing sequence. At the last moment, the commander stepped behind one of his subordinates while gesturing at the map table. Elena held her fire, knowing that a miss or a hit on the wrong target would accomplish nothing while revealing her position to every enemy soldier in the complex. The artillery whine was getting louder. Elena estimated she had perhaps 30 seconds before the first rounds impacted near her team's position. She kept the crosshairs trained on the area where the commander had disappeared, waiting for him to emerge from behind cover. Movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Enemy soldiers were climbing onto rooftops throughout the complex, apparently implementing a coordinated search pattern to locate her position. Elena counted at least 12 different groups spreading across elevated positions, each team equipped with binoculars and communications gear. The commander reappeared in her scope, but only for a few seconds before ducking back behind the map table. Elena realized he was becoming more cautious, probably having received reports about the sniper threat from his search teams. She would need to wait for the right moment when he felt secure enough to expose himself for a longer period. The first artillery round impacted 50 meters short of her team's position, sending up a geyser of concrete debris and metal fragments. Elena watched Martinez and the others press themselves against whatever cover they could find as shrapnel rained down around them. The next rounds would be adjusted for range and would likely score direct hits. Elena made a decision that went against her training. Instead of waiting for the perfect shot on the commander, she shifted her aim to the communications equipment on the water tower platform. If she could destroy their radio gear, it might disrupt the artillery fire mission even without eliminating the commander himself. She acquired the radio antenna array and fired. The bullet struck the equipment with a shower of sparks and electrical components. Immediately, Elena could see confusion among the enemy officers as their communications went dead. The commander emerged from cover to examine the damaged equipment, presenting exactly the target opportunity she had been waiting for. Without hesitation, Elena shifted her aim back to the commander and fired again. The shot was perfect, striking him center mass and spinning him away from the map table. The other officers immediately dove for cover, while guards began firing wildly in all directions, trying to locate the sniper position that had just eliminated their commanding officer. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Elena could see through her scope that the systematic search patterns were breaking down as subordinate officers tried to establish new command authority. Radio chatter increased dramatically as different units began requesting orders and clarification. Most importantly, no additional artillery rounds were falling near her team's position. Elena began moving immediately, knowing that the enemy would now concentrate every available resource on finding and eliminating her. She low-crawled across the rooftop toward a stairwell access, keeping her rifle ready for close-range encounters. Behind her, she could hear helicopter rotors in the distance. The enemy was bringing in air support to assist in the hunt. She reached the stairwell and began descending quickly but quietly. Each floor presented potential threats as enemy soldiers might be searching building interiors as part of their expanded search pattern. Elena paused at each landing to listen for movement below before proceeding. On the second floor, she heard boots and voices approaching from the main corridor. Elena ducked into an abandoned office and pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway. 3 enemy soldiers passed by, speaking in hushed tones as they cleared rooms systematically. She waited until their footsteps faded before continuing her descent. The ground floor presented the greatest challenge. Elena could see through broken windows that enemy patrols were moving between buildings in coordinated patterns. Several soldiers were positioned specifically to watch exit points from the building she was currently inside. She would need to find an alternative route that avoided their observation. Elena discovered a service corridor that led to a loading dock at the rear of the building. The area was partially concealed by stacked shipping containers and abandoned equipment. She could see a narrow alley beyond the loading dock that would provide cover for movement toward her team's position. As she prepared to leave the building, Elena's radio crackled with Martinez's voice. "Phoenix, enemy forces are pulling back from our position. Whatever you did worked, but we're seeing increased activity in your last known location. Advise your status. Elena keyed her radio quietly. I'm mobile and heading back to your position. The commander is eliminated, but they're bringing in air support for the search. I'll need covering fire when I reach the perimeter. She studied the route back to her team's defensive position. It would require crossing approximately 400 meters of hostile territory while avoiding multiple enemy search teams. The helicopter noise was getting closer, and she could see soldiers on rooftops throughout the complex using hand signals to coordinate their movements. Elena checked her ammunition and equipment one final time before leaving the relative safety of the building. She had accomplished the primary objective by eliminating the enemy commander and disrupting their attack. But now she faced the challenge of surviving long enough to rejoin her team. The late afternoon sun was casting longer shadows between the buildings, providing some concealment for movement. Elena estimated she had perhaps 3 hours until sunset, which would bring both advantages and disadvantages. Darkness would help her evade detection, but it would also make navigation more difficult and could separate her from her team's position. She took a deep breath and prepared to move into the hostile environment outside. Elena slipped out of the loading dock and immediately pressed herself against the nearest shipping container. The metal surface was scorching hot from hours of direct sunlight, but it provided essential cover from the search teams moving through the area. She could hear the helicopter circling overhead, its rotors creating a constant drumming, sound that masked smaller noises but also made it difficult to track enemy movement by sound alone. She peered around the edge of the container and spotted 2 enemy soldiers approximately 50 meters away, moving methodically between cover points as they searched for signs of the sniper. Their body language suggested they were nervous, constantly looking over their shoulders and communicating frequently through hand signals. Elena recognized the behavior of soldiers who knew they were hunting a skilled opponent. The alley behind the containers offered a route toward her team's position, but Elena could see that enemy forces had established checkpoints at both ends. She would need to find an alternative path or wait for an opportunity to slip past the patrols undetected. Every minute of delay increased the risk that enemy reinforcements would arrive, or that her team's ammunition would run critically low. Elena decided to move through the industrial complex using the machinery and equipment for concealment rather than trying to avoid the enemy entirely. Large conveyor systems, storage tanks, and processing equipment created a maze of metal corridors that could hide her movement while providing multiple route options if she encountered hostile forces. She crawled under a massive conveyor belt system, using the support framework to stay hidden while making progress toward her team's sector. The space was cramped and filled with mechanical debris, but it allowed her to move undetected past 2 enemy patrols that were searching the area above. Elena could hear their conversations as they passed overhead, discussing search patterns and coordination with other teams. Halfway through the conveyor system, Elena encountered a problem. The framework ahead was damaged, probably from earlier combat, and the passage was blocked by twisted metal and fallen debris. She would need to find another route or risk exposing herself by climbing over the obstruction. Behind her, she could hear more enemy soldiers entering the area, cutting off her retreat path. Elena studied the available options through gaps in the metal framework. To her left was a chemical storage area with large tanks and pipe systems that might provide concealment. To her right was more open ground that led toward a maintenance building, but crossing it would require exposing herself to observation from multiple directions. Ahead was the blocked passage, and behind her were approaching enemy forces. She chose the chemical storage area and began moving carefully between the tanks and piping. The space smelled of industrial solvents and rust, with pools of various liquids creating slippery surfaces that required careful footing. Elena tested each step to avoid making noise that might alert nearby patrols to her presence. As she worked her way through the storage area, Elena heard voices very close by. 2 enemy soldiers were using the space between storage tanks as a rest position while their unit regrouped. She pressed herself against a large pipe and controlled her breathing while listening to their conversation. They were discussing the loss of their commander and speculating about where the sniper might be hiding. One of the soldiers moved closer to Elena's position, apparently investigating a sound or shadow. She prepared to engage with her sidearm if necessary, knowing that any close-range combat would immediately reveal her location to every enemy force in the area. The soldier paused just meters away from her hiding spot, scanning the area with his rifle ready. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the soldier rejoined his companion and they moved on to continue their search in another area. Elena waited until their voices faded completely before resuming her movement through the storage facility. She had learned that enemy forces were becoming more cautious and thorough in their search patterns, which would make the remaining distance to her team's position even more challenging. Elena reached the far side of the storage area and found herself looking across 100 meters of open ground toward the sector where her team was positioned. She could see Martinez and Thompson behind their defensive positions, still engaged in periodic firefights with enemy forces that were probing their perimeter. The good news was that her team appeared to still have ammunition and was maintaining their defensive line. The bad news was that enemy forces had established positions that would allow them to observe and engage anyone trying to cross the open area. She studied the terrain carefully, looking for any feature that might provide concealment during a crossing attempt. A shallow drainage ditch ran roughly parallel to her desired route, but it would require her to crawl through standing water and debris while remaining vulnerable to observation from elevated positions. Alternative routes would add significant time and distance to her journey. Elena's radio crackled softly with a transmission from her team. "All units, this is Martinez. Enemy forces are consolidating in Sector 5. We're receiving probing attacks every 15 minutes, but they appear to be waiting for something. Possibly reinforcements or heavy weapons." She keyed her radio carefully, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "Martinez, this is Phoenix. I'm approximately 100 meters from your position, but crossing will require cover. Can you coordinate suppressive fire on my signal?" "Copy that, Phoenix. We're ready to provide covering fire when you give the word. Be advised, we've observed enemy snipers on elevated positions throughout the complex. They're specifically watching for movement in the open areas." Elena felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. Enemy snipers would make her crossing attempt extremely dangerous, possibly suicidal. She would need to identify their positions and either eliminate them or find a way to mask her movement from their observation. The drainage ditch that had seemed like adequate concealment now appeared to be a potential death trap. She began studying the elevated positions around the open area, looking for signs of enemy sniper teams. Elena spotted movement on at least 3 different rooftops, with what appeared to be scoped rifles and spotting equipment. The enemy had learned from her success and was implementing similar tactics to control the battlefield. Elena realized she was facing a tactical problem that required a different approach. Instead of trying to cross directly to her team's position, she might need to eliminate or distract the enemy snipers first. This would require her to move to a position where she could engage them effectively while avoiding detection by ground patrols that were still searching for her throughout the complex. She began planning a route that would take her to a water treatment building that offered both elevation and concealment. From there, she might be able to engage the enemy snipers and create an opportunity for crossing to her team's position. The plan was risky and would require precise timing, but Elena could see no other option that didn't involve unacceptable casualties. As she prepared to move toward the water treatment building, Elena noticed that the sun was beginning to cast distinctly different shadows. The afternoon was progressing toward evening, and the quality of light was changing in ways that would affect both visibility and shooting conditions. She estimated perhaps 2 hours until sunset, which meant she needed to complete her movement and rejoin her team before darkness complicated the tactical situation even further. Elena took one last look at her team's position and began moving toward the water treatment building, staying low and using every available piece of cover. Elena moved through the shadows cast by industrial equipment, keeping her profile low while navigating toward the water treatment building. The structure was approximately 200 meters away and would require her to cross several open areas where enemy patrols might spot her movement. She timed her advances to coincide with the helicopter's noise overhead, using the sound to mask any footsteps or equipment rattling. The first crossing was a 50-meter sprint between 2 processing buildings. Elena waited until the nearest enemy patrol was facing away from her position, then moved quickly across the open space. She pressed herself against the wall of the next building just as voices approached from around the corner. Two soldiers were discussing something in urgent tones, and Elena caught fragments about sniper and rooftop before they moved past her hiding spot. As she worked her way closer to the water treatment building, Elena noticed that enemy activity was intensifying. More soldiers were arriving in vehicles, and she could see what appeared to be specialized counter-sniper equipment being positioned throughout the complex. The enemy was adapting to her tactics and bringing in resources specifically designed to hunt skilled marksmen. Elena reached the base of the water treatment building and found a maintenance access that led inside. The interior was a maze of pipes, tanks, and mechanical equipment that created excellent concealment while providing multiple routes to higher floors. She began climbing through the infrastructure, testing each handhold and footstep to avoid making noise that might alert nearby patrols. The building's design allowed her to reach the third floor without using conventional stairs or elevators that might be watched by enemy forces. From windows on this level, Elena had a clear view of the rooftop positions where she had spotted enemy snipers. She could see 3 distinct teams, each consisting of a shooter and spotter, positioned to cover different sectors of the battlefield. Elena studied their positions through her scope and realized she was facing a complex tactical problem. The enemy snipers were positioned so they could provide mutual support, meaning that engaging one team would immediately alert the others to her location. She would need to eliminate all 3 teams in rapid succession or find a way to distract them while crossing to her team's position. As she considered her options, Elena heard increased radio chatter from enemy positions throughout the complex. They were coordinating a new phase of their operation, possibly preparing for a final assault on her team's defensive position. Through her scope, she could see enemy forces massing in covered positions around the sector, where Martinez and the others were holding their ground. Elena's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from her team. "Phoenix, this is Martinez. Enemy forces are preparing for what appears to be a coordinated assault. We count approximately 60 hostiles in attack positions. Request immediate support if available." She keyed her radio while maintaining observation of the enemy snipers. "Martinez, I have visual on enemy sniper teams that are preventing my movement to your position. I'm going to attempt to neutralize them, but you need to be ready to move to alternate positions if the situation deteriorates." "Copy that, Phoenix. We're ready to displace on your signal." Elena settled into a shooting position behind the window frame and began calculating shots on the 3 enemy sniper teams. The ranges varied from 300 to 500 meters, with different angles and wind conditions for each shot. She would need to work quickly once she began firing, as the remaining teams would immediately begin hunting for her position. She decided to engage the closest team first, as they posed the most immediate threat to her planned crossing route. Through her scope, Elena could see the sniper and spotter clearly as they scanned the area where her team was positioned. The sniper was lying prone behind a low wall, while the spotter crouched beside him with binoculars and a radio. Elena controlled her breathing and placed the crosshairs on the enemy sniper. The shot was relatively straightforward at 300 meters, but she needed to ensure a quick, clean elimination that would prevent him from alerting the other teams. She applied pressure to the trigger and fired. The bullet struck the enemy sniper in the upper torso, eliminating him instantly. Elena immediately shifted her aim to the spotter, who was turning toward his fallen teammate in confusion. Her second shot took him down before he could raise an alarm through his radio. Without pausing, Elena acquired the second sniper team positioned, approximately 400 meters away on a different rooftop. These enemies had heard the shots and were beginning to scan for the source, but they hadn't yet located her position. Elena aimed carefully and fired, striking the second sniper before he could bring his rifle to bear on her location. The spotter, for the second team, immediately dove for cover and began speaking rapidly into his radio, alerting remaining enemy forces to the presence of a sniper in the water treatment building. Elena shifted her aim to engage him, but he had found good cover behind an air conditioning unit and was no longer visible through her scope. The third sniper team, positioned approximately 500 meters away, was now fully alert and scanning Elena's general area with their rifle scope. She could see the enemy sniper moving his rifle in a systematic search pattern, while his spotter provided guidance through binoculars. Elena realized she had perhaps seconds before they would locate her window position and return fire. She made a quick decision to change positions within the building, rather than attempting the long-range engagement under these conditions. Elena moved rapidly to a different window that provided a different angle on the third sniper team, while keeping her away from the window where they expected to find her. From the new position, Elena could see the third team more clearly, but the shot angle was more challenging due to the building's position relative to their rooftop. She would need to account for both wind drift and the deflection caused by shooting through window glass. The enemy sniper was still searching for her previous position, giving her a brief opportunity for an undetected shot. Elena steadied her rifle against the window frame and acquired the target. The range and angle required precise calculation, but she had eliminated threats at similar distances under more difficult conditions. She controlled her breathing and began applying trigger pressure. Just as she was about to fire, the building's fire alarm suddenly activated, triggered by some kind of motion sensor or security system that was still functioning despite the abandoned state of the facility. The loud, penetrating sound immediately alerted every enemy force in the area to her location in the water treatment building. Elena fired quickly at the third sniper team, but knew the alarm had ruined her concealment advantage. She needed to move immediately as enemy forces would now be converging on the building from multiple directions. Through her scope, she saw her shot had struck the enemy spotter, but the sniper was still functional and now had a general idea of her location. The sound of vehicles and running footsteps reached her ears as enemy reinforcements began surrounding the water treatment building. Elena realized she had perhaps minutes before the building would be overrun by hostile forces. She needed to find an escape route that would allow her to reach her team's position before enemy forces could establish a complete cordon around the facility. Elena began moving through the building's interior, looking for alternative exit routes while the fire alarm continued its ear-piercing wail. Behind her, she could hear boots on stairs as enemy soldiers entered the building and began searching, floor by floor, for the sniper who had eliminated their Overwatch teams. Elena descended through the water treatment building using maintenance shafts and pipe corridors to avoid the enemy soldiers, who were systematically clearing each floor. The fire alarm continued its relentless shrieking, masking the sound of her movement but also preventing her from hearing how close her pursuers might be. She could feel vibrations through the building's structure as multiple teams of soldiers moved through the facility. She reached a basement level that housed the main water processing equipment. Large pumps and filtration systems created a mechanical maze that offered concealment but also limited her movement options. Elena could hear voices and footsteps directly above her as enemy forces searched the ground floor. They would reach the basement within minutes. Elena discovered a service tunnel that led away from the building toward the municipal water system. The tunnel was partially flooded with stagnant water and debris, but it offered an escape route that enemy forces were unlikely to discover quickly. She entered the tunnel and began moving through knee-deep water, trying to minimize splashing sounds while making steady progress away from the building. The tunnel extended for approximately 100 meters before emerging near a pumping station closer to her team's position. Elena could see daylight ahead, but she also heard the sound of vehicles and voices near the tunnel exit. Enemy forces had apparently established a perimeter around the water treatment building and were now searching all possible escape routes. Elena paused near the tunnel exit and listened carefully to the activity outside. She could distinguish at least two different conversations, suggesting multiple enemy soldiers were positioned near the pumping station. Through a drainage grate, she could see boots and legs moving around the area as enemies conducted their search. She keyed her radio quietly, hoping the tunnel's concrete walls would muffle her transmission. "Martinez, this is Phoenix. I'm in a service tunnel approximately 50 meters from your position, but enemy forces are blocking my exit. Can you create a distraction to draw them away from the pumping station?" Martinez's voice came back immediately. "Copy that, Phoenix. We'll initiate contact in 30 seconds to draw their attention. Be ready to move when you hear engagement." Elena positioned herself near the tunnel exit and prepared to move quickly once her team began their distraction. She could hear enemy soldiers above discussing search patterns and coordination with other units. The sun was noticeably lower now, casting longer shadows and changing the quality of light throughout the industrial complex. The sharp crack of rifle fire erupted from her team's position, followed immediately by the heavier response of enemy weapons. Elena could hear shouts and movement as the soldiers near the pumping station responded to the firefight. Through the drainage grate, she watched Boots running toward the sound of combat. Elena pushed open the grate and emerged from the tunnel into the late afternoon air. The pumping station provided some concealment, but she could see enemy soldiers approximately 70 meters away, moving toward her team's position. She needed to cover the remaining distance, without being spotted by any enemies who might look back toward the pumping station. She used the industrial equipment around the pumping station for concealment, while moving toward her team's defensive perimeter. Large pipes and electrical equipment created a corridor that offered protection from observation, but Elena could hear the firefight intensifying ahead. Her team was engaging a significant enemy force, and ammunition expenditure was probably reaching critical levels. Elena reached a position where she could see her team's defensive line. Martinez was behind an overturned truck, firing measured bursts at enemy positions while conserving ammunition. Thompson was treating a wounded soldier behind concrete barriers, and she could see at least 2 other team members engaging targets from different angles. The enemy assault was being conducted by approximately 40 soldiers advancing in coordinated groups. She keyed her radio while moving into position to support her team. "Martinez, this is Phoenix. I'm approaching from the rear of your position. I have clear shots on enemy forces advancing from the east." "Copy that, Phoenix. We're running low on ammunition and can't hold this position much longer. We need to prepare for withdrawal to secondary positions." Elena settled into a firing position behind a concrete foundation that provided both cover and a clear field of fire toward the attacking enemy forces. Through her scope, she could see enemy soldiers moving between cover points as they advanced on her team's position. Their movement was methodical and professional, suggesting these were experienced troops rather than militia forces. She began engaging targets systematically, starting with enemy soldiers who were in positions to threaten her teammates. Elena's first shot eliminated a soldier who was preparing to fire a rocket-propelled grenade at Martinez's position. Her second shot took down an enemy marksman who had been providing covering fire for the advancing assault teams. The effect of Elena's intervention was immediate. Enemy forces began taking cover and looking for the source of the sniper fire that was disrupting their assault. This created opportunities for her team to reposition and consolidate their ammunition. While the enemy attack stalled, Elena continued engaging targets of opportunity while monitoring her team's movement to new positions. She could see that Thompson had successfully moved the wounded soldier to better cover, while Martinez was coordinating the withdrawal to a secondary defensive line that offered better protection from the multi-directional enemy assault. As Elena provided covering fire, she noticed that the sun was beginning to approach the horizon. The late afternoon light was becoming more directional and creating longer shadows between buildings. Within an hour, sunset would dramatically change visibility conditions and tactical options for both sides. The enemy forces regrouped and began a new assault approach that attempted to flank Elena's position while maintaining pressure on her team's new defensive line. Elena realized they were facing a competent enemy commander who was adapting to the changing tactical situation. She would need to reposition herself to maintain effective fire support for her team. Elena began moving to a new firing position that would allow her to cover the flanking movement while maintaining support for her team's withdrawal. The industrial complex provided multiple positions that offered good fields of fire, but each move exposed her to detection and counterfire from enemy forces who were now actively hunting for the sniper who had disrupted their assault. As she moved between positions, Elena observed that enemy reinforcements were arriving in the complex. Additional vehicles and personnel were taking positions around the perimeter, suggesting the enemy was preparing for an extended operation to eliminate her team. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly challenging as enemy forces grew stronger, while her team's resources diminished. Elena reached her new position and immediately began engaging the flanking force that was attempting to outmaneuver her team's defensive line. Through her scope, she could see enemy soldiers moving through the industrial equipment in coordinated bounds, using proper tactical movement to minimize their exposure to defensive fire. The engagement continued for 30 minutes as Elena provided precision fire support while her team conducted a fighting withdrawal to increasingly defensive positions. Enemy forces were pressing their advantage in numbers and equipment, but Elena's sniper support was preventing them from achieving the breakthrough that would allow them to overrun her team's position. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, Elena realized that the approaching sunset would create both opportunities and challenges. The changing light conditions would affect visibility and shooting accuracy, but they might also provide concealment opportunities that could allow her team to break contact and withdraw to a more defensible position. Elena keyed her radio while engaging another target. "Martinez, sunset is approximately 30 minutes away. We need to prepare for nighttime operations or plan withdrawal under cover of darkness." "Copy that, Phoenix."
"Enemy forces are bringing up heavy weapons and additional personnel."
"We may need to consider withdrawal to the extraction point and call for emergency evacuation." Elena watched through her scope as enemy forces positioned what appeared to be heavy machine guns and possibly mortars around her team's defensive perimeter. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, with enemy reinforcements arriving faster than her team could eliminate threats. She estimated they were now facing nearly 80 hostile personnel with support weapons that could overwhelm their defensive positions within minutes. The sun was hanging low on the horizon, casting deep orange light across the industrial complex and creating dramatic shadows that would soon provide concealment opportunities. Elena realized that the approaching sunset represented their best chance for survival, but timing would be critical. They needed to hold their positions until darkness provided cover for withdrawal, while conserving enough ammunition and personnel to execute the movement successfully. Elena keyed her radio while maintaining observation of enemy positions. "Martinez, we need to coordinate withdrawal timing with sunset. Enemy forces are positioning heavy weapons that will make our current positions untenable within minutes." "Copy that, Phoenix. I'm preparing the team for movement to extraction point Alpha. Can you provide covering fire for our withdrawal route?" Elena studied the terrain between her team's position and the designated extraction point approximately 800 meters away. The route would require crossing open ground that was covered by multiple enemy positions, but the approaching sunset would create lighting conditions that favored the defending force. Enemy soldiers would be looking into the setting sun while her team moved with the light behind them. She began engaging enemy heavy weapons crews before they could complete their setup. Elena's first shot eliminated the gunner on a heavy machine gun that was being positioned to cover the main withdrawal route. Her second shot took down the assistant gunner before he could take over the weapon. The crew scattered, but Elena could see other teams working to establish additional weapons positions. The engagement intensified as enemy forces realized they were facing a skilled sniper who was systematically disrupting their tactical advantage. Elena could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions as enemy marksmen attempted to locate and engage her firing position. Bullets began impacting around her cover, forcing her to change positions frequently while maintaining fire support for her team. Elena moved to a new firing position behind a large industrial transformer that provided excellent cover while maintaining fields of fire toward enemy positions. From this location, she could see her team beginning their withdrawal movement in coordinated bounds, with Martinez leading while Thompson provided rearguard security for the wounded soldier they were carrying. Through her scope, Elena observed enemy forces beginning their final assault as they realized the defending team was attempting to withdraw. Approximately 40 soldiers began advancing in coordinated groups while heavy weapons provided covering fire. Elena knew her team would be overwhelmed if she couldn't disrupt this assault long enough for them to reach better defensive positions. She began engaging targets with rapid precision, eliminating enemy soldiers who posed the greatest threat to her team's movement. Elena's shots were creating gaps in the enemy assault formation, but she was burning through ammunition at an unsustainable rate. She estimated perhaps 20 rounds remaining before she would need to rely on her sidearm for close-range defense. The sun touched the horizon and began painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The changing light created dramatic visibility conditions that Elena used to her advantage. Enemy soldiers advancing toward her team's position were silhouetted against the bright sky, making them easy targets while she remained concealed in the shadows of the industrial equipment. Elena noticed that enemy forces were beginning to adjust their tactics in response to the lighting conditions. Some units were attempting to use the industrial structures for concealment, while others were trying to flank her position from directions that avoided the direct sunset glare. She would need to continue moving between firing positions to maintain her tactical advantage. Her radio crackled with Martinez's voice. Phoenix, we're halfway to Extraction Point Alpha, but enemy forces are attempting to cut off our route. We need immediate support on our eastern flank. Elena could see the threat Martinez was describing. A group of approximately 15 enemy soldiers was moving through the industrial complex in an attempt to establish a blocking position across her team's withdrawal route. If they succeeded, her team would be trapped between the blocking force and the main enemy assault. Elena made a tactical decision that would require her to expose herself to significant risk. She began moving rapidly between firing positions while engaging the flanking force, accepting increased exposure to enemy fire in exchange for the mobility needed to disrupt their movement. Her shots were hasty but effective, eliminating key personnel in the flanking force and disrupting their coordination. As she engaged the flanking force, Elena heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors returning to the area. Enemy air support was coming back, probably equipped with thermal imaging systems that would eliminate her team's advantage from the approaching darkness. They needed to complete their withdrawal before the helicopter could establish overwatch of the extraction point. Elena's ammunition was nearly exhausted, but she could see her team approaching the extraction point, where they would have better defensive positions and hopefully contact with friendly forces for evacuation. The enemy assault was losing momentum as the sun disappeared below the horizon and visibility dropped dramatically throughout the industrial complex. The last rays of sunlight created a brief moment of perfect shooting conditions as the sun's angle illuminated enemy positions while leaving Elena's location in shadow. She had one final opportunity to eliminate a critical threat before darkness changed the tactical situation completely. Through her scope, Elena could see an enemy officer who was coordinating the final assault on her team's extraction point. He was positioned approximately 600 meters away, partially concealed behind industrial equipment, but visible enough for a precision shot. Eliminating him would disrupt enemy coordination at the critical moment, when her team needed to establish their defensive perimeter at the extraction point. Elena steadied her breathing and calculated the shot carefully. The range, wind conditions, and lighting all required precise adjustments to her scope settings. This would likely be her final shot before ammunition depletion forced her to rely on movement and concealment for survival. She needed to make it count. The enemy officer moved into perfect position as he stood to point toward her team's location, while coordinating the final assault. Elena placed the crosshairs precisely and began applying trigger pressure. The moment seemed suspended in time as the sun's last rays created perfect visibility conditions for the long-range shot. Elena fired just as the sun disappeared completely below the horizon. Through her scope, she saw the enemy officer fall as confusion immediately spread through the assault force. Without their coordinator, enemy soldiers began hesitating and looking for guidance instead of pressing their attack. The disruption provided exactly the opportunity her team needed to establish their defensive positions at the extraction point. As darkness settled over the industrial complex, Elena began her own withdrawal toward the extraction point. Behind her, she could hear enemy forces regrouping and attempting to reorganize their assault, but the loss of their officer and the onset of night conditions had eliminated their tactical advantage. Her team had survived the impossible situation, and friendly air support would arrive within hours to complete their evacuation. Elena moved through the darkness toward her team's position, knowing that one precise shot at sunset had indeed flipped the fight and saved 7 lives in the process. The mission that had seemed hopeless just hours before was now a success, achieved through determination, skill, and perfect timing when it mattered most.